Exactly 50 years ago this summer, the summer of 1969, my family hovered around a television. It was a standing black and white set, complete with the rabbit ears. And though I was just shy of 4 years old, I remember the awe-inspiring and celebratory feeling of that day. We were watching a wondrous, otherworldly event in an amazing new world country on our very own television, something we hadn't even heard of just a few months before. My family had just migrated to the United States. My father had arrived that academic year as a doctoral student in engineering at the University of Kansas. And my mom, brother, sister, and me had joined him just a few months later from India. So we were living in Lawrence that summer of '69 when the first manned space mission, Apollo 11, successfully landed on the moon. An event we apparently couldn't help ourselves from taking pictures of, as if there weren't going to be better pictures down the road. And while my young girl memories of that day have undoubtedly been supplemented by these family photos, I have a visceral memory of the joy and excitement of my father. He was an explorer, endlessly curious about new worlds. And I've since come to realize, given my career as a public lawyer, the historical context that brought him here. Soon after the Civil Rights Movement, the Immigration Act of 1965 eliminated the last remaining formal color line in US legislation in order to attract skilled professionals to this country. Before that, immigrants had been admitted on the basis of national origin, which was a racial and ethnic classification. But the '65 Act abolished that national origin quota system in order to bring in and attract highly skilled professionals from countries in Asia and not just Europe alone. So with this opening, my dad applied for and gained admission to graduate schools in this country, a kind of crazy moonshot for a young engineer coming from a humble background. And then he ensured that my mom also had the opportunity to get her PhD after we moved to Lincoln in 1970. In the age of successful moon landings, our education system encouraged my generation to think big, teaching us to believe in the power of reason to break down, debate, and solve complex problems. It was an overwhelming belief in the power of the mind, an abiding faith that we could think our way through any complex social problem. And so with a certain toolkit, I went on from little old Lincoln, Nebraska, to have a moonshot career, taking me to the United States Supreme Court, the White House, and to diplomatic, legal, and corporate roles around the world. But then, something happened to upend and disrupt my trajectory. It was actually two things. First, I felt keenly the limits of that old toolkit to address complex problems at a certain massive scale, at least without a good amount of collateral damage along the way. When you're working on legislation that takes up 2,200 pages just to lay it out, or working at a corporation that operates in 83 countries, or working on causes and issues that can go global virally almost overnight, the notion that you can map or fully anticipate cause and effect is pretty far-fetched. And that's true at the apparent level, much less at the subtle or root level. Working on issues that can affect 100 million or 1 billion people, as happens in Silicon Valley or Wall Street, Washington, London, and other elite power centers, may sound impactful and well-meaning, except there's no way you can be in relationship with 1 million or 1 billion people. In an era of exponential technology and disruptive change, where institutional mottos include things like move fast and break things, or where BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals, are celebrated, I became keenly aware of the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. And while that certainly doesn't advocate failing to act, it does counsel humility and conscious awareness about the scope and speed of our actions, a near impossible task for actions at a certain massive global scale. I found myself questioning the whole mantra that bigger is better, or that impact and scale should be measured by breadth rather than depth. More knowledge, after all, does not mean more wisdom, and more resources do not necessarily lead to more well-being. I began seeking a different way, a kind of disruption in our models of impact and social change. The second thing that disrupted my trajectory was that almost at the same time that I began to feel the limits of that old tool set, I gained new tools. These tools were very different from what I'd learned through the education system. They allowed me to scale depths, to go deep within, and to look immediately around me rather than externally for power, and to tap in to a deeper and more infinite power source than the head alone, the power of the heart and of connection. And of love, not just intimate love, but the love that comes from feeling deeply inside that we are all one organism bound inextricably together, just like the cells and organs of our body need one another for sustenance. After I left the White House in 2012, I signed up for my first 10-day silent meditation retreat on a bit of a lark. I hadn't even meditated for 10 seconds in my life, much less 10 days. Well, it turned out to be the first of many more to come, and the beginning of a new way of daily life for the past 7 years. Because with awareness and deep concentration on breath and body sensation for an extended period of time, I caught a momentary glimpse of what sages and mystics of all faith traditions have described for millennia, and what quantum science and modern physics has only verified in the past century. That all physical matter, including our bodies, is ever shifting and reforming into a new mass every nanosecond. Matter is comprised of ever-changing wavelets, and we're constantly exchanging particles with one another. And so the boundaries between you and me are highly permeable and at core, non-existent. I caught a momentary glimpse of the dissolved self and his dissolved ego. We are an interconnected organism, and every interaction I have with a so-called other is in fact an interaction I'm having with myself. Think about that for just a second. Every interaction I have is with myself. It's not just that I am my brother's keeper, or that I should do unto others what I would have them do unto me. It's that I am my brother, and what I do to others, I am in fact doing to myself. Just as the cells and particles within our body form one organism, all of us are interconnected parts of a single larger whole. And I caught a glimpse of this, not as an abstract idea, but as an embodied experience. And think about this also as a source of so-called power. We impact the whole, not just from top-down acts or from acting externally on the world from on high. Rather, if we just do the work of shifting and healing our energy in here and in just the few feet immediately around us, we powerfully impact the whole through our being. Gandhi said that we must be the change we wish to see in the world. And with that, he said that we transform the world by transforming ourselves. That's not to say that we should get wrapped up in the self or lost in the self, but rather that we should view our lives, our work, and our relationships as a front line, a first place for practicing the kind of connection to self, to others, and to nature that we seek to enhance through our moonshot projects in the world. Mandela, after all, had his greatest impact not just through his activism or statecraft alone, but through the deep presence and loving being that energetically permeated all of his outer work. And that deep presence was cultivated by his decades as a political prisoner, where he went deep within himself to access and unleash the power of his heart. Imagine the impact of such a superpower of loving, healing presence in the hands of even just a few, so as to trigger a chain reaction in our collective organism. This got me feeling the validity of a different model of social change, a quantum view in which a small, distributed group of people begins to change the world from the inside out, energetically, from the micro particle level, and not just from the massive macro global scale. And so it seems only fitting that we should be open to receiving a new understanding of social change in the 21st century, given that quantum physics and relativity theory have only recently upended the millennia-long Newtonian view that we are discrete, separate beings, or that only external force can change the direction of mass. And network science has informed us of the vast collective effects that can result from seemingly disparate, small individual acts. Certainly in nature, we see beautiful examples of collective intelligence and collective impact, as when the micro movements of a single starling can affect thousands, if not millions, of neighboring birds to form a shape-shifting flock or a murmuration. So where did this all lead me, all this thinking? Back to Nebraska, of course. When I tell people that I've moved back here after 35 years on the East Coast and abroad, they kind of nervously laugh and say, "Why? What happened?" And I can tell that what they're really thinking is, did she have some kind of a breakdown? And I kind of, politely respond like, no, I just really want to be here. And they laugh nervously some more. But the truth is I did break. I broke open to a breakthrough, not a breakdown. After exploring all the outer worlds, I found myself seeking a new space. Not outer space or kind of an elevated place, but the open, grounded plains of Nebraska. There seems no better place to experiment with a quantum view of change than in a place that operates at a human and community scale, bounded by land and nature. And it's in Nebraska that I've begun to tap into a different personal energy source. I often tell people that I thought I was blonde until I was 25. And I say this jokingly, of course, but really only half jokingly. Because the truth is, growing up in 1970s Nebraska, there weren't a lot of people around that looked like me. And the only Indians anyone had ever heard of are those that we now call Native Americans. And in that environment, you basically had to assimilate or die. And I assimilated to such a large degree externally that I learned to bury, or I did bury, feelings of difference deep inside me. The buried feelings fueled my moonshot with an energy based on separation and fear. I analogize it now to kind of a dirty fossil fuel type energy, an energy that's finite and that relies on external, hierarchical, and extractive forms of power to replenish. The kind of energy that can power our rocket ships, but that can also unwittingly further our own and other suffering. And I've come to realize that each of us carries within us this fossil fuel of buried feelings of fear and separation. Whether we're educated or uneducated, rich or poor, white, brown, or black, Christian or non-Christian. It may be a lack of love at home or just general feelings of unworthiness, of less than, and not enough. I've learned to design and create new kinds of social spaces now. Not the big constitutional structures I used to work on in the past, including in Iraq and Afghanistan, but conversational and other small-scale collective spaces that allow for deep listening. When we hold space for ourselves and one another, we begin to access and unleash the blocked energy of the heart to tap into a new type of fuel, a clean, renewable, and infinitely regenerative energy based on connection and love. And as we heal ourselves, we shift the energy of others around us and help heal the world. Amazingly, my post-moonshot experience is not unlike what our astronauts experienced when they journeyed to the moon. Frank White interviewed the dozens of astronauts of the American space program. He found that what transformed them the most, or what they said they were most transformed by, was not their glimpse or time in outer space, but rather what happened when they turned their gaze back to Earth and saw themselves anew. Now, I have to confess that I've struggled a bit more than usual with this talk. And I think it's because words in this kind of a setting feel more like the first half of my journey, the occupying of space with our minds. It feels like the antithesis of holding space with our hearts, the kind of being and deep listening that I now seek. Ultimately, my own commitment is to try to keep doing the work of becoming and embodying the change. So let's embrace the approach of healing and transforming the world by healing and transforming ourselves. And not just at the margins. Not just as a nice, quaint, feel-good self-care supplement to the real work that we do on our big issues, but rather as the real work. So let's right-size our lives and focus to the very personal and human scale, really concentrating on disentangling and freeing the boundless flows of love and energy at our depths. And then let the laws of nature and the cosmos multiply our personal transformations out into the planet and beyond. Thank you.